Two Vikings starters, Dalvin Tomlinson and Patrick Peterson, are no longer Vikings. They are free agents as of today. So we got to talk about what that means, plus your Twitter Tuesday questions on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. You can also find us on Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. As of about 3 p.m. Central yesterday, February 20th, two contracts on the Minnesota Vikings voided out. That means that they are now free agents. Dalvin Tomlinson and Patrick Peterson, currently not under contract by the Minnesota Vikings. They can negotiate with whoever they want. They can sign with whoever they want. And they can do all of it before earnest free agency actually starts. So I have gotten a whole bunch of questions about this for the Twitter Tuesday mailbag in various ways. So I'm just going to explain how this all goes down so everybody can know. So Dalvin Tomlinson's contract, we'll start with his. Patrick Peterson's is a little simpler. Actually, let's start with P2 because it is simpler. Patrick Peterson's contract had one void year on it to spread out some signing bonus. $750,000 of dead cap money hits the Vikings books as soon as his contract voids, which happened yesterday afternoon. So that is essentially the same way as if you had given him an $11 million base salary plus, whatever signing bonus proration, and then he were a cap casualty, except you planned to do it ahead of time. That's a good way to think about void years, is that you kind of cut somebody to save cap space, but you were really upfront about the fact that you intended to do that. And let's not negotiate out a dummy year and put monopoly money in it. Let's just say, your contract will void out. That's what happened with Dalvin Tomlinson and Patrick Peterson. Now, Dalvin Tomlinson had 3 void years on the end of his deal, with $2.5 million in prorated bonus hitting in each one of them. But once the contract voids, you have to pay all that out right away. Again, a way to think about that is that the Vikings have physically paid Dalvin Tomlinson $7.5 million more dollars than they have paid against the salary cap, than they have accounted for on the salary cap. So that's got to catch up. And the second he is not under contract, it has to kind of catch up, hitting it, as soon as the league year turns over. So that's $8.25 million in dead cap that is just on the Vikings books. There is now nothing they can do about that. That just is part of the math. That was probably in the projection you were familiar with. I think the number that's been floating around is 23, 24 million over the cap that they have to get down. That 8.25 is part of that. That's already been factored in the way you're probably looking at it. So don't flip out too much. This is part of it. I would have loved the Vikings to extend Dalvin Tomlinson, but they would have had to get it done before February 20th. He could still come back. He's just a free agent. He can sign any one of 32 teams, including the Vikings, if he wants to. But that would be so inefficient that it's really hard for me to think that that's part of the Vikings' plan. I don't see it. With Patrick Peterson, on the other hand, because he only had one void year, it's kind of this, if you extended him, that prorated bonus would still be as part of the contract. It's unmovable money. That was going to happen no matter what you did here. So he can go try the market, maybe come back, maybe not, whatever. And functionally, it would be the same as if you signed a deal with him in February or if you signed the deal with him in May. It kind of doesn't matter, and it's more a matter of what he wants to do to figure out what's best for him and that contract, although he's been vocal that he wants to come back. So I don't think Patrick Peterson is as gone as Dalvin Tomlinson is. I'd be very surprised to see Tomlinson back. Also, for whatever it's worth, I believe both these guys count as compensatory free agents. I learned today, thank you to Brad Spielberger, because I was wrong about this. But apparently usually when a contract voids out, it doesn't count toward the compensatory pick formula because it's like a cap casualty, right? And if you cut someone before their contract is supposed to be over, you don't get a compensatory pick for that guy. Compensatory picks are for contracts that expire, for guys that play out every year you promised for them to play out. But with void years, if you initially agree to them, then it is kind of that you played every year that you were supposed to play on. So with Dalvin Tomlinson, we signed you to a 2-year deal. And yeah, we did some weird accounting stuff with it, but we signed you to a 2-year deal. You played your 2 years. So congratulations and good luck on your next venture. He becomes a compensatory free agent for the Vikings. So we want Dalvin Tomlinson to go get the bag, both for his sake, because he seems like a really good guy. He was a very beloved member of the locker room and a leadership figure here. And of course, once a Viking, always a Viking, right? But also, if he goes and gets the bag somewhere, we get draft picks. So go Dalvin Tomlinson and go Patrick Peterson as well. Although if he comes back and signs here, I'd be plenty happy with that as well. So I think that answered a whole bunch of your questions from the mailbag, but I do have other questions that are not related to that. So let's hop into them. If you have questions for me, you can always ask me at Luke Braun NFL or at Locked On Vikings on Twitter. You can send an email to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com or fill out the Google form in the show notes or leave a YouTube comment if you prefer. I'll see it, hopefully, probably. First one that I'm going to do comes from Casey, who asks a lot of chatter about the Vikings taking a cornerback early, and based on recent draft profiles, who would we target, and do you think this is a necessity given Dantzler, Evans, and Booth are on the roster? So yes, second part first. Yes, it's definitely a necessity. Those 3 bodies are not enough bodies. You need them all to hit their positive outcomes just to have a starting unit, and then you don't have any depth. But that's also quite a bit to ask anyways. So yes, you absolutely need cornerbacks, probably in free agency and the draft. Who would we target based on draft profiles and stuff? This is obviously very different. We don't really have a great sense for the kind of defensive backs that the Vikings like because we've only seen one draft. And yeah, they drafted a safety in the first round. They drafted a Caleb Evans and Andrew Booth. But with just one draft, it's like that's also kind of who was available and did that fit their thing? But or maybe it didn't, but he fell far enough, like with Booth. So I can't really answer that historically. But with Brian Flores's defense, you want press man ability and off man ability. Those are the biggest things because of the way that Flores uses so much cover 1 and cover 0. You're in man a lot. Like you got guys on an island a lot. So that's what you really need. And guys that can back off in a zone and click and close and do all that stuff doesn't really move the needle as much as it did when like last year when we were in a Fangio style defense. Ja asks, what positions do you think Kwesi will handle most differently than Rick Spielman did throughout his tenure? That is a fascinating one. I think generally, I don't know if there's like position by position stuff, but I think generally it's going to be a lot less rigid about athletic thresholds. Rick Spielman was really big into athletic thresholds, and he would draft the worst players you've ever seen if they cross the athletic thresholds. Like Moritz Boringer is like the most extreme example here. That dude was an athletic freak. That dude had measurables like Calvin Johnson, and I'm not even exaggerating. But he didn't know how to play football, and Rick Spielman was like, screw it, 6th-round pick for that, right? Let's see if we can't try something. He's got the athletic threshold. And I think Kwesi, for all the focus on analytics and stuff, and he certainly has his like 10 split thing and explosiveness thing, I'm not sure I would see the same like vigor with it and the same inflexibility with it, which we kind of saw. Like Ed Ingram wasn't like a great tester. And so we'll see. Again, I don't know Kwesi that well. He's got one draft under his belt, so we don't have that much data to go off of, and I'm sort of guessing in the dark here. I've got a ton more questions to get to. I'll try to rip through them as fast as I can to get to everybody's question. But first, let me talk to you about the best tasting protein bar on the planet. It is Built Bar. All right. If you are perhaps stuck inside because the god of winter has decided to smite Minnesota, then go to the fridge, grab a Built Bar, get that protein in you. All right. If you are looking for a delicious treat to cope with the weather or whatever, but you don't want to knock off your great calorie thing that you've been doing this whole year, right? How about some Built? It's healthy, and it's tasty. Like 130 calories in one of these bad boys, 4 grams of sugar, not too bad, and then 17 grams of protein. And the flavors are insane. Churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, cookies and creams, double chocolate, coconut puffs. It is insane. The puffs are great. They're like marshmallowy. And assuming that you can get outside or operate a vehicle outside, you can even go to Walmart or Sam's Club and get some directly in person. You don't have to wait for delivery anymore. But if you prefer, you can always just go to built.com and get that stuff delivered directly to your door. That's once again built.com. Thank me later. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Moving on with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag. Legend of Korra asks, how do we cope with no Vikings football? Boy, do I have the answer for you. Go to patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. Click on the history of the Minnesota Vikings. There's like a bunch of little icons for all the different categories. You can do some film breakdowns if you prefer, but go click the history of the Minnesota Vikings. It is a 7-part docu-series, 7-episode documentary series, like a season of TV. I think it's they average about an hour each. And go watch the history of the Minnesota Vikings. It was kind of my passion project of last year, and I couldn't be more proud of it. And thank you to everybody who has watched and talked to me about it. I really appreciate that too. Jacob Luck asks, assuming you were Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, what player or player's contract would you incinerate first, giving the team a clean slate from the player as if they never existed on the team in the first place? Ooh, boy. Okay, so you're essentially asking me, what do I think is the worst contract on the Vikings? And that's tough because I have a lot of respect for Rob Brzezinski and the contracts that he makes. Like, I don't think any of these are like particularly rough or awful situations. Like, there are only 3 contracts on the entire books that can't save money if you cut them. That would be like more expensive to cut than they would be to keep because of dead cap. And that's Kirk Cousins, Daniil Hunter, and Christian Darrisaw. And that's just how like first round contracts work after the first 2 years. Harrison Smith's contract isn't great, but I don't want to like incinerate him. Same with like Adam Thielen. I guess I would go with like Adam Thielen. I guess maybe Kirk Cousins. I guess that's the one contract that's like the hardest to get out of. So I guess I would incinerate Kirk Cousins so that we can trade up and draft Anthony Richardson. Listen to my show yesterday. I'll go with that. Maurice Morth says, Mind Game, how many additional 2023 picks is Kwesi able to acquire until the draft and during the draft? Okay, so if I had to set an over-under on this, how many can he is kind of infinite. Go check out the PFF mock simulator. You can absolutely break it. You can walk away with 25 picks if you wanted to. But through like trade downs and maybe trading players away, although I don't know, looking at the contracts and the way that they work, I don't know if that's like too much of a necessity, but I certainly wouldn't rule it out. Let's say they trade one player, get 1 pick out of it, or maybe they get like a pick and a 7, right? So call it 2 picks, but one of them's small. And then a bunch of trade downs and stuff. I bet they could get it. I'd set the over-under for 8.5. 8.5 times the Vikings select in 2023. And I'd probably take the over on that. I'm probably being conservative there. But that would be my best guess. But it's really hard because, trading down in the draft could be a trade for 3 picks. It could be a trade for 2 picks. It could be a trade for a pick this year and a pick next year, right? But I do think Kwesi will do a lot of it. Bad Dad Joke asks, there seems to be a growing number of linebacker prospects that don't cleanly fit as traditional linebackers. Parsons, Asamoah, JOK. Oh yeah, JOK. The Browns are completely off my radar. Like I've completely forgotten that they exist, and I hope you do too. They seem to fall in between linebacker or defensive end or linebacker or safety hybrids. With players like these, how does their role and previous usage impact how they are evaluated by teams for both their play and tape and measurables at the combine? So it's not necessarily that you're looking for a player who matches what you like. You don't necessarily need to see him do, a defense that matches what you're going to have him do in that defense, right? Like you don't need a perfect match. It's obviously nice. It's great to say, oh, wow, he's really familiar with what we're going to ask him to do. So let's, that will obviously put a guy up on his board, but you can get away with not seeing it as long as you see evidence that he can do it. Then it's okay. Like measurables in the combine and stuff. If you're looking for a pass rusher and you want a really explosive, bendy pass rusher, well, you can see that at the combine, even if he went to a college that had him rushing from 2-point stances and dropping back into coverage a lot or something like that, right? The inverse of that, I guess, was the Anthony Barr situation. Like you could kind of see, oh, he can do that. They just didn't ask him to a lot because they were doing something different. Or maybe the best example here is Justin Jefferson. He only played in the slot his senior year at LSU because that's just what they were doing with their offense. But you could tell, and you could look back at his sophomore year, you could see that he can do other stuff, and they just had their own weird reasons for not asking him to do it. So it just means you have to look a little harder for the traits you're looking for. And it's about, what am I going to ask him to do? And is he good at that? And I don't really care if he was good or bad or whatever at what you asked him to do, if it doesn't match what I'm going to ask him to do, because that's not relevant. James Kunow asks, how do teams determine whether to give up on a prospect that has been drafted versus allowing him an extra year to develop? So one of the open secrets of the NFL is that a lot of times coaches will get a rookie that they were super excited about, and they'll get him in camp, and in the first day, they're like, oh no, this dude stinks. We're screwed, right? But obviously it's, there's a little bit of a face-saving kind of measure there. And coaches, for the most part, are teachers. And so when they see a prospect or a guy struggle, I think for the most part, except for some real curmudgeons, maybe this is a bit of a rosy optimist of me, but I think for the most part, their reaction isn't to say, oh no, this guy's screwed, we got to figure out how to move on from him. It's, okay, what's wrong with him and how can I teach it better? How can I fix it? How can I, what can I teach this guy to make him better? And how can we work with him to improve him? Most of the people who get into coaching get into it for that idea of, if you've ever taught or even tutored, as a summer job or whatever, I did that once. I did SAT classes, and there is a rush to seeing someone improve. That, if it's been your goal to get them to improve, seeing those results is intoxicating, and that's, I think, what coaches get into it for. So when you see that, I don't know if it's you get one more chance, you get one more year, that's your last chance, and it's not like that parental. It's more, okay, you got a problem here, how can we fix it? And I've got the rest of your contract to fix it if it's a rookie deal, right? Unless you can't make the 53 roster, unless I need to cut you because there's a better player on the roster, then that's one thing. So I guess the answer to your question is whenever he's not one of the best 53 guys to be on your roster. Connor Lifson asks, it seems like McVay schemes generally don't implement read options as a significant part of the playbook. Like you said, whatever team drafts Richardson could probably implement read options heavily. I'm wondering if we can expect O'Connell to want to expand his playbook this way. Short answer would be yeah. I don't know if it's not that McVay offenses just don't have their read option thing. I think they would all love to have read options, but when you got Jared Goff and Matt Stafford and Kirk Cousins and Jimmy Garoppolo, then it's like, okay, well, these guys are not read option quarterbacks. But I think if they had read option quarterbacks, then yeah, sure, why not? And we've seen, I want to say there were McVay offenses like Sam Darnold that did it. I don't know if those were McVay offenses though. I don't know the Jets that well, but I don't know. I think so if they had the dude, but it just so happens that those offenses haven't had the dude. I've got a whole bunch more questions, and I do want to finish ripping through them, so we'll get there. But first, just because football is over doesn't mean Grambling has to be over. The midway point of the NBA season is here. We just had the dunk contest and the All-Star game and all that stuff, and it is a perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. As the season winds down, and of course NHL kind of on the same cadence, you can be a new FanDuel customer, which is very good for you because you will get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app, which is safe, secure, super easy to use. You can bet on whatever you want, from money line to point scorers, threes drained, same game parlays, and I know you guys love that. Please keep sending me your parlays. I love to see them, especially send me the wild ones that you hit. Please take your victory lap at me. I love that. And if you are a first-time user and you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up, you get that no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets. Once again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Onward and upward with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag. Thank you all so much for your questions. Next one comes from WimpyFam5, who says, do you think Kirk Cousins can be a Brett Favre type player, turn Anthony Richardson into an Aaron Rodgers superstar, assuming we draft him? I don't know how familiar you are with the Aaron Rodgers Brett Favre thing, but I don't think you want that as much as you might think. That was not a good dynamic, and Brett Favre actively refused to develop Aaron Rodgers, and that was kind of the thing that spurned their bitter divorce that caused people to burn Favre jerseys in 2009 and caused him to sign with the Vikings out of just spite. That was why he came here, just to stick it to Green Bay. Nope, you can't have any qualms about that. I don't know if we want that. But what I will say is, yes, there are absolutely things Richardson can learn from Kirk Cousins, in particular footwork in his dropbacks. Cousins is very, very, very clean about that. And then clean mechanically, that's always been kind of his number 1A strength. And Anthony Richardson does not have that. I absolutely think he could learn just through osmosis. And I don't think Kirk Cousins would be as bitter about it. He does not seem like as spiteful a man as Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers, who I believe the same thing is happening with Jordan Love. And we're going to find out about it in Think Pieces 3 years from now. Jack asks if that is completely baseless speculation, by the way. I'm not sauced up on the Green Bay Packers. Jack says, if the scenario that you outlined today where we trade up for Richardson comes to fruition, what is our most expensive free agent acquisition? Okay, so that scenario is that they trade a first rounder this year and a first rounder next year to go up to 12 and pick Anthony Richardson at 12, which is about the steepest I would go. Somebody else asked, what's the steepest you would do? It's that. So if that comes to fruition, what's our most expensive free agent acquisition? I said maybe a Jamel Dean or Jonathan Jones type. Yeah, one of those. Jamel Dean would be a good one. But here's the deal with that. So if you are going to trade up for Anthony Richardson, you are also in tandem with that. You're not going to extend Kirk Cousins, right? Because you're planning to move on from him. So you'll leave his contract as is, and you won't have QB money in 2024, which means you can go into free agency with that 2024 money available and knowing that you don't have any of it earmarked for a quarterback because you kind of have your plan and you're going to try to draft someone, you can sort of spend a little bit more freely. And just because you have to backload the contracts, but it kind of means that you can start using the free agency money for 2024 to get guys you really want that happen to be available this year. You don't need to wait until the season where you have the cap space to spend that cap space. You can just earmark it for backloaded contracts, not unlike what the Vikings did with Za'Darius Smith. He cost $3.5 million against the cap last year. The Packers paid most of his contract because of dead money stuff when they cut him. So if you're going to do this, we're going for it with Anthony Richardson thing. I mean, look, if you get screwed on the trade up or he gets sniped or something like that, you're kind of screwed anyways. So I think you can kind of earmark money and spend money that way and just leave yourself some outs in case things go belly up. Connor M asks, how do you think Kwesi's approach to the offseason could differ from other GMs that don't have his Wall Street background? So yeah, Kwesi's very economics. I mean, when you hear him talk, it's like corporate buzzword hell. He takes me back to a very dark, boardroom meeting place in my life. Every time I hear him talk, it's very corporate. But it's the biggest thing with him is that we kind of learned this last year in the way that he respects trading down. The trade down he made with the Lions was undervalued, but it was undervalued based on historical data of how much teams tend to pay to move up from 32 to 12 or 32 to 14 or whatever it was. The Lions paid less than you usually pay, but the Vikings were still projected to come out ahead in that trade by trade charts that use how these picks tend to turn out. So it's that's the one Kwesi's using. He's not as worried about getting market value so long as he gets surplus value or projected to get surplus value. These are all probabilistic assets, so you kind of have to take it all as dice rolls. Doug Brown asks, how can I read off-season roster move predictions without them hurting my feelings because they cut my favorite player? You can't get that attached to anyone, if they cut your favorite player, that would be a bummer. But once again, once a Viking, always a Viking. I have had players that Stephon Diggs was my favorite Viking since 2015. He was my favorite dude on the Vikings. Maybe Teddy. I was a big Teddy Bridgewater guy. But I loved Stephon Diggs. I still love Stephon Diggs. And yeah, it hurt my heart when they traded him and that he wanted out and all that. Like, that was difficult. And I didn't like that. But you can still admire players that you love, even if they don't play for your favorite team. I firmly believe that. So don't worry about it too much. Chris asks, what, in your opinion, is the funniest play in Vikings history? It's the wrong way around, man. It has to be. I hate to say it because, I mean, it's probably what's keeping Jim Marshall out of the Hall of Fame. And that's not fair, but I think it's the way it is. But man, that's hilarious. That's so funny. And he picked the ball up and he got a safety because he forgot which end zone was which. That is utterly hilarious. If you want a more recent example, the time Kirk Cousins lined up under the right guard, I still snicker to myself sometimes when that pops into my brain, and it will live rent-free in my head forever. Shadow asks, someone offers you a hack where you suddenly get the best player / coach in the league for a certain position in a trade for your own best player, excluding quarterback. Which one would you choose for a Super Bowl run next year or a long-term dynasty? So that would mean like trading. You could get Jalen Ramsey if you traded away whoever you think the best corner on the Vikings is, Cam Dantzler, I guess, which would be a decent option, or Sauce Gardner or whatever, Patrick Surtain if you want to do that. Who would you choose for a Super Bowl run next year, a long-term dynasty? I think Aaron Donald is so transcendently above everybody else that I'm probably trading for him and getting rid of, I guess, what would it be? Tonga? Would it be like James Lynch? Like, who's our 3-tech? Like, who's our kind of B-gap rusher? Or would you say Harrison Phillips and just call it defensive tackle as an umbrella term? But whoever you think that would be for Aaron Donald feels like a pretty good one. I don't know if you wanted to, like, I wouldn't do one that causes me to trade away Justin Jefferson for whoever you think is better than Justin Jefferson, which you might think nobody is. So like, that's moot. Like Christian Darrisaw or Tristan Wirfs or whoever the best tackle is in the league is like marginal, right? But I think you can get a lot off DT. You can get a lot off corner. So it's like Surtain is really good. I like that one a lot. Or Sauce Gardner, I guess. Or just go get Aaron Donald. It's probably Aaron Donald. He breaks the sport. Like, it's beyond just being good at the position. Like, he breaks defense. He makes it completely different to prepare for you. Stezo asks, in the spirit of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who on current Viking squad is most likely to do a fashion show in NYC rather than attend a Super Bowl parade? 1,000,000% with a bullet. I've never been more sure of any answer to any question in my life. Nick Muse absolutely would go to an NYC fashion show instead of a Super Bowl parade. That just makes sense in my brain, and I'm not going to explain it further. And finally, Kurt with 2 C's asks, who is your favorite XFL team and why? All right, I am in limbo here. I was a big LA Wildcats guy. If you watch on YouTube, you probably see me do a lot of shows with an LA Wildcats t-shirt on. It is one of my favorite t-shirts. It's always one of the first ones off the pile after I do laundry. I love it. Go Wildcats, meow meow forever. Shout out Nick Muse again. But now there's no Wildcats. So I am a free agent. I am seeking my new XFL fandom. I watched the whole weekend this weekend. I was very endeared to the Battlehawks and the Brahmas, who played each other in a very hard-fought battle, big comeback. Battlehawks are probably the front runner right now. Very dope aesthetic. I love the caw thing. I love the uniforms and all that. I really liked Jordan Ta'amu in the first iteration of the XFL too. And so that is a really good one, but the Brahmas seem pretty cool. I think they're my favorite jersey, maybe the Renegades, but the Renegades are incredibly frustrating. And I'm sorry, they're out. They were way too frustrating to watch them bumble and stumble their way into a very stupid win against the Vipers. The Battlehawks, well, they battled and I'm into it, but we'll see. The first 2 weeks are exploratory and then we'll start to see where my allegiances lie. But it's going to be probably one of those two. I don't mind the Sea Dragons. I also don't mind the Vipers. The Roughnecks seem a little bit too easy. It feels like picking Bama. And the Orlando Guardians are a catastrophe, and I know better than to throw my lot in with them. Tomorrow on the show, we're going to talk. I didn't get to the TJ Hawkinson thing, so that's my bad. So tomorrow we'll get to the TJ Hawkinson thing. Essentially, the Vikings are interested in extending him, which isn't very much news, but it gives us an excuse to talk about it. So we'll make a whole show about it. All right. How about that? I will talk to you all then for that. And as always, Skol.